So welcome to our session. Good morning. So our session today, we're going to talk about the Cloud Audit Academy and what it is, what does it do, and we're also going to do a preview of one of the modules within the course, just to give you a little bit of context on what are some of the information that's being covered in this course. So first of all, I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Victor Mu. I am part of the Security Assurance Services team. So we are a group of ex-auditors that's helping our customers, AWS customers, be compliant in the cloud. So we do a lot of engagements with customers, helping them generate evidence, helping them to talk to their auditors, and provide them the information and the configuration that they need to be compliant with specific requirements that they would need to run those specific workloads. Now I'll pass it down to Paul, who's going to introduce himself as well.
Hey everyone. Just a reminder: there is a sound adjustment thing on your headphone in case any of us are too loud or you can't hear us. But good morning, everyone. My name is Paul Hong. I am an industry specialist within our AWS Security Assurance team. So we do everything from a security compliance perspective, working with governments, auditors, regulators, and our customers globally to build confidence in AWS and the services we provide in our infrastructure. So I'll be presenting one of the example models later today, and I'll pass it over to Hannah.
Cool. Thank you, Paul. Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah Whitaker, and I'm a technical training specialist for the Amazon Security Learning Team. Our team creates security training deliverables for an internal and external audience. One of our most popular trainings is the Amazon Cybersecurity Awareness Training. And if you have questions about that one, we have a booth that's set up in the Northeast foyer on the second floor. Okay. So as Paul touched on, today the purpose of this session is going to be an overview of AWS Cloud Audit Academy. So why we built it, what it is, the levels that we offer, and what is covered. We'll then go into a Cloud Audit Academy AWS specific preview, starting with a high-level overview of the format of that course, and then we'll go into a sample of one of our domains from that course. And then at the end, if you have any questions, please feel free to come up to us afterward. Okay. So over the past few years, auditing security in the cloud has become one of the fastest growing questions among AWS customers across multiple industries and all around the world. So some of the challenges we hear most often are that compliance teams want to effectively audit cloud environments and take advantage of the security control options that are built into the cloud, but legacy processes have been built for an on-premises environment. Not to mention that security IT auditing techniques have been reshaped in the cloud. We also hear that engineering teams want to move their regulated workloads to AWS to take advantage of its innovation capabilities, but governance, risk, and compliance teams are uncertain on how AWS can help them meet their compliance requirements through audits. So these differences require some reconciliation and improvement work to be done on compliance programs, audit processes, and audit training. The latter is where the Amazon Security Learning Team and AWS Security Assurance Services teamed up to create AWS Cloud Audit Academy. AWS Cloud Audit Academy is a learning curriculum for those in governance, risk, and compliance roles, or anyone involved in taking compliance workloads to market. It's an interactive learning experience that narrows in scope as learners progress through the training, starting with cloud as a concept across general industry, all the way down to AWS and industry specific. So we now offer 3 levels with a 4th coming soon. The foundational version focuses on the differences between auditing in the cloud versus on-premises. It's a cloud agnostic and not specific to any industry. And it's a high-level introductory course that focuses on security auditing techniques in the cloud. This one is offered as an e-learning as well as a virtual instructor-led training. The AWS-specific version was built in collaboration with PricewaterhouseCoopers and focuses on the verification techniques when operating specifically in AWS. This one is aligned to industry-recognized security and control domains and provides illustrative examples and risks and scenarios with corresponding control objectives, control activities, and AWS best practices to bring real-world relevance to the content. By the end of this course, attendees should understand approaches to assessing AWS controls implemented and configured by AWS customers to illustrate these risks and scenarios. Attendees will also receive continuing professional education units from some of the most recognized IT governance and security professional associations in the industry. The number of credits will depend on the course modality and level completed. So these are the topics that we cover on AWS Cloud Audit Academy. They're the building blocks to any security program, and levels of training are aligned to the GDPR Privacy Directive, as well as global industry recognized security and control domains, such as the CSA CCM, ISO 27001, NIST 853, and SOC 1 and 2. As you can see, there's a comprehensive list of topics within the security, compliance, and privacy domains. AWS Cloud Audit Academy provides the necessary knowledge to effectively utilize AWS services and best practices to comply with industry-recognized security frameworks, standards, and statutory regulations to help customers accelerate their migration to the cloud. The next levels narrow into specific with industry and frameworks. So the PCI DSS version, which launches today, was built in collaboration with ISACA and focuses on using AWS services and best practices to meet the requirements of PCI DSS version 3.2.1. We also have a hands-on learning that goes along with this course that focuses on verification techniques. The AWS Cloud Audit Academy NIST on AWS, which will launch later in the fall, focuses on assessing U.S. federal and DoD workloads and is aligned to the NIST 800-171 with control mappings to NIST 853 with CMMC. So now I'll pass it over to Victor, who will start our AWS Cloud Audit Academy AWS specific preview.
All right, thanks, Hannah. All right, so now that we kind of got some background on the Cloud Audit Academy, what it is, what are the different levels that we have, we're gonna do a quick preview of one of the modules from our AWS specific section, our specific version of the course. The reason we picked this module is because it's somewhat of a hot topic right now, with UN announcing that there are a 600% increase in cybercrime within the US and worldwide. It's really something that we want to keep mindful. And with AWS, your potential of automating some of those alerting, some of those monitoring tools, and some of those remediation efforts, for a lot of the auditors, that's something new that they haven't seen in their on-prem environment. So this is where we're gonna cover some of that and how you as auditors or compliance professionals, how to get some evidence from some of these tools that we're gonna look at. All right, so the course, the module, as an agenda, we start with our learning objective, which are some of the concepts that are going to be important for auditors and regulators and any of the folks in the audience. Then we're going to cover the domain overview, which is setting a baseline for this module, what are some of the things that we're going to cover, as well as the shared responsibility model. We'll cover that a little bit more if you're not familiar with it. Then we're gonna go through our fictitious company, any company restaurant, and look at their example architecture diagram, as well as some of those services within AWS they would use within their environment and how you would obtain evidence from those services. And then finally, we're gonna look at some example risks, control objectives, and AWS best practices associated with the learning objectives. Some expectations and assumptions for this course, like Hannah mentioned earlier, this is the AWS specific version. So a lot of the content here is specific to AWS, as well as some industry recognized standards such as ISO, NIST, SOC, CCM, etc. We're focused on security and audit concepts when operating in AWS. So this is part of the security in the cloud versus security of the cloud concept. And then finally, since this is our second course, we do expect some sort of basic understanding of AWS as well as security and network functionalities within kind of the domain overall. And then finally, in this course, we will refer some of our customers as cloud service customers or CSCs. So you'll see a lot of that reference as well. And then finally, the learning objectives, risks, controls, and everything that we describe in here are for illustrative purposes only. There's tons of ways for you to implement controls within the AWS environment. Therefore, it is really critical for you as auditors and compliance professionals to use this course more as a guidance, more as a check on the current process that you have to make sure that it fits your unique environment. All right, so for today, for our preview for this course, we're just gonna cover our first learning objective. This one is related to the importance of having a instant response program. Make sure it's tested, make sure it's implemented in your environment, your AWS environment, and we'll look at how exactly that could be done. We have a second learning objective that we'll not be covering today. However, this is part of the overall module as well. So that one is specifically related to automated remediation within the AWS environment, how you can configure it, how you can audit it, etc. All right, so this is the shared responsibility model. Hopefully everyone's familiar with this. This is presented a lot in a lot of our presentations, as well as available on the AWS portal itself. So essentially, the reason for having the shared responsibility model is because security and compliance on AWS is a shared responsibility between the customer as well as AWS. And that breakdown will depend on exactly the service that you're using within the AWS environment. So since we're talking about instant response, let me throw an example out for you. So if you, the customer, is using a EC2 instance within the AWS environment, you as the customer is responsible for anything on the guest operating system, so the operating system you install on your EC2 instance, and as well as any utility or any database that you install on top of that operating system. While AWS is responsible for the underlying infrastructure, such as the hardware, as well as the hypervisor level. However, if you're using a service that's more abstract, for example, like Lambda, you as the customer is responsible for instances that relate to the execution of your Lambda code, as well as keeping that source code secure, while AWS is responsible for the underlying infrastructure, including the instance, the operating system, as well as the application itself. All right, so just take a quick poll check here. Anyone, or I'll start with the first one. How well do you understand the shared responsibility model? So if you think you are a shared responsibility model guru, please raise your hand. Okay, hello. If you think you understand the shared responsibility model at a theoretical level, but don't know how to put it into practice, please raise your hand. A lot more, yes. And then finally, if you understand relatively little about the shared responsibility model, please raise your hand. Just a few of you, okay, cool. So we actually see that a lot with our courses. A lot of folks understand the shared responsibility model, what it is. However, they don't know exactly how to put that into place. And the main point of that is because the shared responsibility model shifts based off the different services you use. So there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to the shared responsibility model. That's why it's really important for you to understand your environment, the services that you use, in order to take account of the shared responsibility model. Our team helps with that a lot, helping our customers understand what they're responsible for based off the services that they use with relate to security and compliance. So really taking a poll, that's like essentially what we see here out in the field. So it's great to see that as well. All right, so setting up some baseline for instant response. So take a quick quote from our AWS Worldwide Audit team. Instant response is an organizational mechanism that to respond to incidents, including initial reporting, information gathering, root cause analysis, remediation, and notification to stakeholders. So this quote really shows that there are a number of phases related to instant response that does not change when you move to AWS or the cloud environment. So let me use our Any Company restaurant to showcase some of the services that they use within some of these different phases of instant response. So we're gonna start with our logging mechanism, which is the information gathering phase. So here on the left, you can see a very simple diagram that Any Company restaurant has implemented within the AWS environment. So within logging, they would send a lot of their logs into these two tools, AWS CloudTrail and AWS CloudWatch or Amazon CloudWatch. So first, they would send any API calls or any management plane activities from the AWS services into CloudTrail. So that's the service that tracks any sort of user activity, trying to change your EC2 instance, trying to change your firewall, anything, any type of activity that's associated with your API calls in the AWS environment. And Amazon CloudWatch can be used to log your application as well as any sort of database log. So it can centralize the logging of those by sending your log into CloudWatch log groups. And then once you have your logging, you definitely want to do some analysis on it. And this is some of the automation tool that's available on AWS that can help you identify issues, focusing on the monitoring piece of those logs. So first of all, I want to call out Amazon GuardDuty, which is a AWS IDS-like service that uses machine learning and artificial intelligence to find abnormal behavior within your traffic. So it monitors DNS log, VPC flow log, as well as your CloudTrail log to see if there's anything abnormal going on within your environment. And we'll showcase how you can look at the configuration of that in just a little bit. Next, we have AWS Security Hub. So this, you can think of it more as a single pane of glass type of tool for your compliance folks, compliance teams, to make sure that they're tracking all of the findings within your AWS environment. So it's getting feed from IAM, it's getting feed from Macy, it's getting feed from GuardDuty. So it's a centralized location where all the findings are located. Then we'll have Amazon Macy, which is helpful for you to identify sensitive information within your S3 buckets. So a lot of things could be stored in your S3 bucket, your customer data. You can store your application logs, your CloudTrail logs. A lot of logging in S3 can be stored there. So you can use Amazon Macy to scan through those buckets to make sure that you're not storing any sort of sensitive information, any sort of customer data, any sort of credit card data, or anything like that within those logs. This may be helpful for your incident response personnel who doesn't have a business need to know into the application log, but needs to view those logs to make sure that there's no anything specific suspicious going on. And then finally, we have AWS Config. So AWS Config is really there to help you monitor the configuration of your AWS resources. So a lot of the tools within AWS are configuration, and you can use AWS config rules to monitor specific configuration to make sure that they're either enabled, disabled, and also part of that auto remediation is to input trigger points for that rule to perform something in response to a misconfiguration within the environment. And then once you have all your monitor, once you have your findings, your data points, you probably want to centralize a investigation portal or somewhere that you can combine all your findings to make sure that it's not a one-off thing. It could be a much bigger incident within your environment. So that is where Amazon Detective comes in. So this tool allows you to pull in all of your findings within your AWS environment, as well as flow logs, IP address access, et cetera, based off of either an instance that you found an issue on or a specific IP address that you found to be an issue. And then finally, after you do your triaging, after you find out the root cause analysis, you can use AWS Lambda to perform some automated functionalities or automated remediation within your environment without any manual intervention. So this is definitely helpful to cut down in some of the SLA that you have to meet for specific requirements. And for AWS Lambda, you can do part of your process. So you don't have to auto remediate your entire issue right on the spot. You could use it for containment purposes, just to get a specific instance out isolated on your network. And then your IR personnel, your IR team can come in and do their investigation and find out exactly what's going on. So this hopefully will remediate your IR folks from getting those 2 a.m. calls in the morning. So that's definitely going to be helpful for them. And then finally, we have AWS Simple Notification Service. So this is more of a service that help notify individuals, notify teams via email, via SMS, that that there is a potential finding or a potential issue within your environment. It uses a pub-scribe model, essentially a publication and a subscription model, in order for those individuals to get notified. You can think of this as a following your favorite YouTube channel or following a specific person on Twitter. Once they post something, you automatically get notified of those specific things. And this is helpful for decoupling your service and really making that team that owns the response that owns the responsibility of respond to specific incidents know exactly who should get notified of what, control and manage that group to see exactly who needs to get notified. All right, so that's all of the services that any company restaurant uses for their environment. Now I'm going to pass on to Paul to talk about exactly how you obtain evidence and the specific risks and control associated with this first learning objective.
All right, thanks, Victor. Hey, everyone. Again, my name is Paul Hong. I'm an AWS Security Assurance Manager. So I have background in audit and specifically building content for the NIST program related to Cloud Audit Academy, how to audit government and federal DoD workloads. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how the format of this course is, and we start with risks. So we take a risk-based approach, and we have risks with control objectives tied to address those risks, as well as supporting control activities to support the control objective. And so for our first risk here, it's related to inadequate preparation for incidents. So basically, if you lack a proper policy, documents, incident response plan, documentation, management review, then you're not going to be appropriately prepared for your incident response processes. So as a part of that, we will talk about the control objectives tied to these. And so for our first example control objective, we have incident response policy and plans formally documented and communicated. So when we talk about documentation, right, it's always making sure you have the correct details within your incident response policy and your plan to ensure that your employees who are responsible for incident response know what to do in the event of a potential incident. Right. And so that's the documentation portion. And for communicating it is to make sure that you have some sort of, whether it's an email notification or a secure document repository for your appropriate incident response personnel to have access to. You want to always make sure that they're aware of where those documents are, if there's any updates, and what systems and tools can be used to help with their incident response processes. And so for the two control activities tied to support this control objective, we've got the incident response policy itself, which we've talked about, and then the incident management review. So we'll jump into the control activities, but just before that, we did also want to point out that we are very cognizant of the many different compliance, risk, security frameworks that exist. And here are just a few of them that we actually map the control objectives, those risks, to these frameworks. So you can say CSA, GDPR, ISO, NIST, SOC, kind of all those different considerations that we've taken. We try to apply that and make sure that we're helping to address universally based on those kind of common control frameworks. Okay, so for our first control activity, incident response policy. So this is for, again, talking about formalizing those documents, your policy documents with your requirements for incident response, and then your plan itself. So having a communication chain, ensuring that the right appropriate individuals are included in that communication chain, that you have your retention requirements, your RTO requirements, any sort of objectives that you want to get out of your incident response process, you want to make sure it's documented, right? And so we also include these example test plans for illustrative purposes for auditors who need to consider auditing the AWS or a cloud environment, right? And so it's going to be very similar in some circumstances to the traditional on-prem environment. So you've got, obtaining, inspecting those management policies. That's going to be something every organization should have in place. But when it comes to actually talking about those services, those tools, whether cloud services or third parties outside of AWS, you want to make sure you're including those. You have your identified configurations so that you can actually confirm your configurations match that policy or match the expectations of your incident response plan. And so we will talk about, and a big focus of this course is to talk about and show evidence how AWS configurations in the management console can be confirmed, how you can navigate it, and really just to show if you're whether you're being audited or you're the auditor yourself, to show in the management console how you can actually do that. And that's just it's a very new concept for many people, especially my background coming from the audit world. We really didn't have a great idea of how to audit the cloud, and there's a lot of automation. There's a lot of capabilities to make the auditor's job easier, and we'll talk about some of those. All right, so here is a good outline diagram of the different AWS services that Victor had mentioned, and really the flow of what it would look like in your incident response process. So obviously a very simplified version, but you can see we have our Amazon VPC here within two different availability zones, our AZs, with our EC2 instances and the Amazon RDS, or the relational database service instances attached to those EC2s. So we've got that Amazon VPC, and as you can see, we talked about AWS Cloud Trail. That is basically our logging service that logs any sort of API access, API activity, right? And so that would be captured, that would capture the environment of your Amazon VPC from one end. And then you can see another arrow going from Amazon VPC into guard duty. So for that, that's any sort of network activity, right? Your VPC flow logs, your DNS logs. And so Amazon Guard Duty, our threat detection system that Victor had mentioned, will take that information, that data, and ingest it from CloudTrail, the API activity, as well as from the Amazon VPC. And it will analyze it using AI ML, and based on those capabilities, determine whether or not there is a potential incident, looking for anomalous activity. And then it will create what we call a finding, right? So an Amazon Guard Duty finding. And what can happen, you see the arrow go to Amazon CloudWatch events. It will feed into there, and in Amazon CloudWatch events, you can actually create rules to trigger based on a certain event. And for here, for example, for Amazon Guard Duty, if it identifies an anomalous activity, determines that it's a finding, then you can set up CloudWatch to trigger a rule to send a notification through Amazon SNS to your incident response team. So as you can see the flow, we've got all our data sources coming from the VPC, going into Guard Duty, triggering a rule in CloudWatch events to send a notification through Amazon SNS or simple notification service, and then notifying your incident response team. So this is just the basic overview of how that incident response process can flow and how you can use AWS services to assist you in that manner. All right, and so we talked about how we can actually confirm some of these configurations within the management console itself for each of these services. So for Guard Duty, the customer actually cannot go in and modify how it's doing its triaging, its anomalous detection, but you can confirm whether or not it is in fact enabled or not. So you can see there's a suspend option, there's a disable option. You want to see that grayed out, right? So if you see something selected in this area, then that's an immediate question, should we enable Guard Duty? And so auditors will oftentimes go in and just confirm that is in fact configured. And then there's also a way to track it through CloudTrail. So again, our API logging tool. And we've got the event name, so creating a detector, deleting a detector, updating a detector. And that's going to be for the event source on the far end for guard duty. So we're seeing that these are events from guard duty and it's being logged. If you see one of these events occur, particularly delete detector, right? If you see something like that or you see a change, your team should be aware. If it's a change you're not aware of, then this is a way to indicate, okay, we should probably look into this. All right, and then so this is CloudWatch. So we are on this is the rules tab. So we talked about how in CloudWatch you can set up rules to trigger based on certain events and then create an automated response like notifying your incident response team. And so in this instance, we have the example for guard duty. So this is the rule that we've created for this instance. And if we click into these details, you can see we have our ARN, the Amazon resource name, which is basically the unique identifier for any AWS resource. We got our event pattern, which we'll go into, and then the status of enabled. So again, if you want to confirm these configurations are actually enabled, there's going to be lots of things you can look at to confirm that. And if we look at the event pattern itself, we've got the source, so AWS guard duty, and then we've got the detail type, so guard duty finding. So that is indicating that based on a guard duty finding, that will trigger this rule. And then this rule, as a result, will send to this target, which is an SNS topic, which is basically like a group of individuals that will be notified if this rule is triggered. And so in this case, for the SNS topic guard duty, it is going to trigger that topic. And if we go into Amazon Simple Notification Service on the topics tab, we can see that guard duty is listed there. And if we click into guard duty, we can see here, so under subscriptions, if there were individuals to notify, you would want your incident response team actually inserted into here. It could be their email, it could be their text, it could be via another automated mechanism like a Lambda function, but some way to identify who are those appropriate individuals on your incident response team that should be notified if there's a guard duty finding triggering a CloudWatch rule that is sent through this SNS notification. All right, so that was the first risk. I hope that helped to give a little highlight of what how we kind of format the course and how we walk through those relevant AWS services per risk, per control objective, down to the control activity level. And so for the next one, this control activity is for incident management review. So we talked a little bit about this. It could be for your policy documents, your incident response plans, but making sure that someone is that with the appropriate knowledge and authority is in fact reviewing this. They're looking at a position of detail where they actually can catch any sort of issues, update any configurations based on organizational policy or on regulations or compliance requirements. And then there are also logs or reports within AWS itself that management can also review in support of their incident response process to ensure that it is in fact following their written policies. And then as an auditor, you also always want to verify any system generated evidence is complete and accurate so that you're covering your entire population for that audit period. And then inspecting, reviewing the artifacts, looking into the details of the configuration itself. And so one example of a tool or a portion of the management console for CloudTrail that can be used is the event history. So if you go in here, you can actually filter your logs based on the event ID, event name, event source, etc. But in this case, you can look at any sort of activity that you want as far as related to your incident response process. And if you trigger on certain things, that you can have management go in, filter, and then determine, okay, are these events all covered? For this one that looks suspicious, was there actually a ticket open for it? And you can follow that entire process through your AWS environment. And if you have third-party tools or ticketing system that is managed outside of your AWS environment, you can even use this as a start for your population of potential findings and use sample testing, because typically you wouldn't want to test everything, right? But you could use sample testing and then go in and then make sure that the entire process was followed according to policy, according to the incident response plan, and remediated in a timely manner or determined to be a false positive. All right, so those were the two control activity examples that we wanted to cover. Typically, what we do is after each of those risks that we cover, we'll also provide some best practices based on AWS, based on other industry standards. And so the first one, incident response plan, is formalized and tested. We talked about formalizing it. We talked about the documentation and the importance of that as a baseline to compare actual operations. But then also from a testing perspective, if you think about a traditional on-prem environment, it might be a tabletop exercise or actually running through the incident response process for a fictitious or a example incident to kind of test it. But actually in AWS, you can replicate your environment for testing purposes specifically. So that's a great capability that you can use so you're not impacting your production environments. And then the next bullet, logging, always important to make sure that you're logging within each of your services, you're configuring those according to policy, and that you're also retaining it in a secure place like Amazon S3 or CloudWatch. And then kind of into the third bullet, ensuring you have log retention. I know we talked about how it's very important to make sure you're retaining your logs for a long enough period, because in many cases, organizations are not identifying those incidents until days later, or weeks or months later. So you want to ensure that you have your logs available to do your root cause analysis. And then Amazon S3 object lock and write only, read many times model. There's lots of protections for your S3 buckets itself, our storage service. And then making sure you have static thresholds, anomaly detection, you're configuring CloudWatch appropriately like we talked about. Compliance check rules are present with an AWS config or security hub. We briefly talked about those services, but I do really like, so AWS config is an awesome service to monitor your AWS environment, all your resources. Anytime you make a change to a configuration, you can see the before and after specifically by resource type. And you can also set up rules for automated auditing. This is a great one because you can, for example, there's a rule for ensuring all your S3 buckets have server-side encryption enabled. That's a great way to see in your entire environment that any S3 bucket that is not configured to be encrypted, you can go in and see which buckets are like that. And when you're being audited, many times they'll say, okay, give us evidence, your buckets are protected. Give me screenshots of all your S3 buckets. And you're like, but we have hundreds, maybe thousands. How can we give you a screenshot of every single one? AWS config is a great way to show an automated approach to your entire environment, saying they're all in fact encrypted. And if they're not, they'll specifically tell you which ones are not. And then you can go accordingly with your auditors or your plan or whatever it is to verify automated. And then you can also go in the S3 console itself and verify that it's default and that the automation is in fact working. And the security hub, as Victor mentioned, is our way to aggregate all those findings. You can aggregate AWS config, guard duty, and third-party tools as well. So it's a great centralized view. And then we talked about Macy as well, but that can be used for monitoring any sort of sensitive information, especially in your S3 buckets. So those are just some of our recommendations there. We typically will wrap up each of the sections by risk with our best practices, and then as well as these knowledge checks. So we'll do a quick knowledge check here for all of you based on what we discussed. So what are some AWS services that auditors may need to inspect as part of their audits of the incident response process? So let's see who's been listening. So who thinks it's Amazon Guard Duty? Show of hands. Okay. AWS CloudTrail. All right. Amazon CloudWatch. Good. And Amazon SNS. Okay. All right. Awesome. Well, you're all wrong because it's actually all of them. No, so you're all right. So good job. We actually covered all of these in that diagram. So these are some of the core services for your incident response process. I hope this gave you a good little intro into them if you're new to AWS. And if you have a little more experience, then I hope this helped to show how it looks from a big picture perspective. So we have a lot of other resources that we did want to share. If you found this kind of session and this preview valuable, you have any additional questions, please take some time, take a picture of the QR code. We have our Cloud Audit Academy landing page that you can visit. It has information on all our different versions of the Cloud Audit Academy course. So you can get more information there. You can also reach out to our AWS account managers or the Cloud Audit Academy or CAA team directly for more information. So we're always willing to help and provide some questions and figure out how we can best deliver this information to you. We have virtual options, we have in-person options, etc. So we can work with your schedule. Okay, and then plenty of more resources. I'm sure you're aware there's dozens and dozens of different videos and courses you can take specific to security and compliance. We've got our industry recognized credentials, the cloud practitioner, our most entry level one, good for starters. We got the solutions architect credentials as well as security specialties, lots of different specialty credentials as well. And then all sorts of other resources here, hands-on classroom training, a ramp up guide, which basically is an aggregation of all the trainings we think are crucial or essential for a learning path. So in this case, for security and compliance. And then again, some QR codes, please take note of. And that's about it. We've got some time for questions at the end. If you want to come up and speak with us, since this is a silent session, we can actually talk to you that way. But please feel free to reach out. Our contact information is here. Again, if you have any questions, you can come up after the session. And please remember to take the survey. Thank you, everyone.